Hi. I have no slides, okay? Which is ironic since I've been here teaching and helping to mentor pitches for the last few days with She Loves Tech. I have no slides. And I just wrote this. So everything I coached people to do this week, I'm not doing, which is generally the way that this works, okay? So I want to talk tonight about impact investing. So who has heard the word impact investing in the last 3 hours? Probably everybody. Okay. I mean, it's very buzzy right now. We all hear about impact investing. Impact investing a couple of years ago wasn't really a phrase or a term that anybody was using. I mean, at least in Singapore, where I'm from, it meant kind of charity, right? It was something you did on the side. It wasn't what a real founder did. It wasn't what real investors invested in. It was kind of a nice thing to do, but it wasn't mainstream. Today, it's everywhere. In fact, I'm working with Asian Development Bank to set up a fund for impact investing in emerging markets across Asia. So now I'm doing it. But 2 years ago, no one knew what it was. So that's what I want to talk about tonight is what is impact investing? Where did it come from? How did we get here? Okay? So, but before that, you get to hear about me. How did I get here? So I've been in Asia 27 years. I'm American. I've lived mostly in Singapore. I came after spending about 10 years in Silicon Valley, started as a filmmaker. I made films for a lot of tech companies. They kept sending me to Asia. I really liked Asia. I wrote my first business plan. Boom, here I am. I started a company, a branch of my film production company, ended up in Singapore and ended up here. So I did documentaries, I made commercials, educational CD-ROMs, remember that? Before there was an internet. And then I helped start an internet, excuse me, an Internet 1.0 company. Okay, so this was in the very early days of the internet. We took American media brands and brought them to Asia. So I brought CNET to Asia. I brought MTV to Asia. I brought E! Online to Asia. I brought Fashion TV to Asia. I brought a lot of really high quality companies here. In 2.5 years, we grew from 4 people to 650 people. I raised about $60 million in venture funding. We went public on NASDAQ. It was 2.5 years, boom, 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 the whole roller coaster. As it turns out, we went public on the second worst day in the history of NASDAQ still. Okay, it was us and it was Krispy Kreme. Krispy Kreme is still around. So that was part one. Part two then, and one key point was that I'm very proud of, I sold the very first banner ad in Southeast Asia. Okay, when we had seen that. Do you even remember banner ads? I sold the very first one. Okay, very cool, yeah? So then I had a second startup. The first one wasn't enough, okay? I sold mostly Western mobile games into Asian markets. So I had screensavers, ringtones, lots of Britney Spears ringtones, lots of Yao Ming screensavers, Super Mario, Sonic, those kinds of things. I eventually became the largest distributor of mobile games in Southeast Asia, sold that company. So that's kind of my background as a founder and as a startup guy. Later, I started working in the startup industry, and I worked with William and Chinaccelerator and Mox, Founder Institute, and recently I was running muru-D, which is Telstra's early stage accelerator in Southeast Asia, until they pulled the plug on that. And now I'm working with Asian Development Bank to set up this fund. Okay? So what is impact? That's sort of my background. Now I'm doing impact. How did we get here? I really think that impact investing is, I have a definition of it, which I wrote down. It refers to investments made into organizations, companies, and funds with the intention to generate a measurable, beneficial, social, and environmental impact alongside a financial return, or what we call a double bottom line. Okay, the double bottom line is fiscal performance and social impact. And I think we're starting to see many more companies that can be characterized like that. Maybe you have them as well. It's not only on the investment side, it's also on the founder side and the startup side, right? So let's talk about how we got here, because it didn't start overnight, right? Even though it seems like, boom, these flowers bloomed, there's been a lot of things that went into it happening. So I see it as 3 distinct phases. Okay, I better hurry up. Okay, 3 distinct phases. Internet 1.0 and Internet 2.0. So the first Internet was just putting stuff on the Internet, brochureware. If you had a company, boom, you had a website. Internet 2.0 was more social, where communities started to form, people spoke to one another on the Internet, you started to have communities, you started to have Reddit, you started to have Facebook, you started to have things where people created content as well, okay? The second phase of that is then mobility, phones. Remember that these, like this phone, iPhone is only like 10 years old, 12 years old. The whole app economy, everything that we do on our phones is really only about a decade old. So that really has changed a lot of technology recently. And it also started to change it a lot in emerging markets, okay? So in China, 15 years ago, people were starting to get mobile phones, okay? If you're in Nigeria, you're in Philippines, you're in Indonesia, it's only 5, 6, 7 years ago, okay? Very recent, but it's starting to happen. Now, billions and billions of people have phones, live on them, work on them, buy on them, talk on them, all sorts of things, right? Also, along with that came the startup industry as we know it. So when I did the first internet company, there were no real VCs, small VCs. We raised money from Intel and GE Capital and Citibank, big companies like that. Things like Chinaccelerator, any one of these startup programs that you know about here in China, angel investors, early stage investors, they didn't exist, right? This is all really new as well. And that came in the last 10 or 12 years. So another key element in this puzzle. So then phase 2 came with the democratization of apps and startups. Pretty soon, it became clear that you didn't have to go to MIT or Stanford to start a technology company, that the tools were available for kind of anyone to be able to do it. If you had an idea and had some technological prowess or knew someone who did, you could start a company, you could build an app. You were able to do that. The tools were in place, the tech was in place, the money was coming. You had VCs starting to show up who had looking at small companies. You had small companies growing in the States, in China, growing very big, going IPO. And it became doable, you know? People like us could start our own companies, right? It wasn't just some other guy in California, right? So it became a viable option for many of us. And not only there, but like China, well, we are in China, Nigeria, Mexico, Thailand, et cetera. Okay? And the ecosystem kept getting stronger. So we had more investors, we had more accelerators, more programs, more money, et cetera. Also, we started to get measurements and metrics. Okay? Before, early days of the internet, there were none. Nobody really cared. You know, maybe you had some banner ads, maybe you made some money on it, but you really weren't measuring ROI or CAC or CLR or any of the things that make the internet or your mobile apps work today. Those weren't around before. Those started about 8, 10 years ago. Okay? And finally, we have phase 3, which is where everything starts here, what I'm calling the age of awareness. So we get founders everywhere, okay? Founders solving local problems. If you go to an accelerator now, if you go to a pitch contest, I probably see 400 to 500 early stage companies every year. And I'd say the best ones are the ones who are solving local problems, right? They're not trying to be the Uber of this or the Airbnb of that or the Facebook of this or the Tencent of that. They're trying to solve local problems. And they're getting money. And you're starting to see that. And if you were at She Loves Tech today, you saw 12, 16 companies from different countries solving local problems. You see that everywhere, okay? And investor sees that, you know, these companies make money, so they start to invest in them as well, as do institutions. You start to have, one more minute. You start to have investors, you start to have companies who are investing here. And simultaneously, I think, companies started to realize that they had a responsibility in the world as well, that they just couldn't be making money. In the past 5, 6, 7 years, you start to see large corporations starting to be responsible for what they're making, where they're making it, who they're selling it to. News organizations are calling them on it. So it becomes a cycle, all right? And so I think 2, 3 years ago, the UN set out 17 Sustainable Development Goals. I don't know how many people know that. They're called the SDGs. And these are guidelines for growth over the next, up to 2030 for sustainability. What companies should be doing, what countries should be doing, what individuals should be doing, okay? And that's a measurement now. So what's happening is you're starting to get companies that are being measured on these SDGs, okay? I'm not gonna name all 17 of them, but you probably know some of them, okay? You're starting to have investors looking at the SDGs as qualifications of investing in companies. So in addition to measuring success via financial, traditionally, you're starting to see if companies actually meet sustainability goals, can be good corporate citizens, can be playing in the environmental space positively, and there's measurements to see whether that works or not. So I think by bringing all of those things together, we're now starting to have companies that you may be founding or that we see today that are looking at their businesses not only to make money, but actually to do good, to make impact in their communities, to solve local problems. Investors are measuring them on those factors. We buy those products based on those factors or those services. And now we have essentially this environment for impact investing. I've been trying to kick this around a little bit in my head, as you can see. It's not a fully formed idea yet, but I really believe that this is the result of 10, 15, 20 years of startups and investors and corporates and now finally nonprofits all kind of merging together to give us a new kind of company and new kinds of startups. And as we start to look at our own companies and what we're doing, I think that this is what we're going to be measured by as well. So I think that's really what impact investing is and where it comes from. I'm happy to talk to people about it later on. I think it's worth a lot more than Britney Spears ringtones, personally, or banner ads. But there you go. That's my thought. Thanks.